He wore a simple grey tracksuit, the kind you'd buy at a department store, not a boutique. The sneakers on his feet were clean, but creased with the geography of 1,000 miles walked on city pavement. He held a first-class ticket. She saw a problem. He owned the airline. This was supposed to be a simple flight, a 6-hour commute in the sky from Los Angeles to New York. For the passengers in their leather-clad pods, it was a promise of champagne, quiet, and the gentle hum of engines. But when Brenda Barlow, a senior purser with 30 years of service stitched into her starched uniform, decided her own bitter prejudices were more important than company policy, she ignited a fire that would burn her entire world to the ground. What happens when the man you decide to humiliate isn't just another passenger, but the billionaire who just secretly bought your past, present and future? Fasten your seatbelts. You are about to witness a masterclass in quiet, calculated revenge that proves one eternal truth. Never judge a man by his clothes, especially when that man has the power to strip you of everything you own. The air in the majestic air, celestial lounge at LAX, was a carefully curated blend of recycled oxygen and entitlement. It smelled of expensive leather and faint floral perfume. Julian Vance sat in a corner, away from the floor-to-ceiling windows, not in a tailored suit, but in the soft, unassuming grey tracksuit that served as his armor of invisibility. At 35, he carried the quiet intensity of a man who listened more than he spoke, an observant stillness that the loud and the self-important often mistook for weakness. They were profoundly mistaken. Julian was exhausted, but it was the bone-deep weariness of a man who had just spent 96 sleepless hours orchestrating the silent, hostile takeover of a corporate giant. He was now the majority shareholder of Majestic Air, the very airline whose lounge he was sitting in. The final wire transfer had cleared less than a day ago. The world didn't know. The press didn't know. And most certainly, the employees who walked past him with trays of sparkling water and warm nuts didn't know. He wanted to see the product for himself, to touch the rot he knew existed within the airline's gilded cage before the announcement dropped like a bomb on Monday morning. His mission was personal. He wasn't just an investor. He was an avenger. His mother, Florence, had been a flight attendant for 35 years with another carrier. She had come home countless nights with aching feet and a spirit bruised by the casual cruelty of passengers and the class-based snobbery of her own senior colleagues. She had died 2 years ago, but her stories of being treated like furniture, of being invisible, were burned into his soul. He bought Majestic Air not for profit, but for her. To build an airline she would have been proud to work for. He was scrolling through a secure file on his phone, a dossier compiled by a private investigator. It was a list of employee complaints, specifically those that had been dismissed by HR. One name appeared again and again: Brenda Barlow. The file was thick with accounts of her condescending tone, her thinly veiled racism, and her special talent for making paying customers feel like intruders. An anonymous email from a junior flight attendant had pinpointed this very flight, MAU 112 to JFK, as a place to witness the master at her malevolent work. "Excuse me, can you believe the nerve?" A sharp voice cut through the lounge's quiet murmur. Julian looked up from his phone. A woman in a Chanel suit was speaking loudly to her husband, gesturing with a flute of champagne towards a young family struggling with a stroller and 2 toddlers. "They let anyone in here now. All those credit card points are ruining the experience." Brenda Barlow, standing near the check-in desk, overheard the comment. Julian recognized her from the photo in the file, the perfectly coiffed blonde hair, the rigidly polite smile that didn't reach her cold, assessing eyes. Instead of ignoring the remark or offering the family a kind word, Brenda walked over to the woman in Chanel and gave a small, conspiratorial smile. "We're doing our best to maintain standards, Mrs. Davenport. Some people just don't understand decorum." She said it just loud enough for the young mother, now blushing with shame, to hear. Julian felt a familiar, hot coil of anger tighten in his gut. It was the same anger he'd felt as a boy when his mother told him a first-class passenger had thrown a magazine at her because his drink wasn't cold enough. He took a slow, deep breath, forcing the emotion down. He was not here as a son. He was here as an owner. He needed data, not emotion. He made a quick note on his phone. BB. Publicly shames family with children. Aligns with elite passenger against others. He watched as Brenda then glided through the lounge, her posture radiating an unearned superiority. Her eyes swept the room, cataloguing, judging. When her gaze fell upon Julian in his corner, it wasn't a glance. It was a dismissal. She saw the tracksuit, the worn sneakers, the simple black baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. She didn't see a person. She saw a stain on her pristine environment. Her lip curled in a barely perceptible sneer before she turned away. Julian checked his watch. Boarding would begin in 10 minutes. He stood up and headed for the gate, wanting to be one of the first to board. He needed a front row seat for the performance. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, the sterile, chilled air of the aircraft washed over him. At the doorway of the Boeing 777 stood Brenda Barlow. She was greeting a silver-haired man in a banker's suit with a dazzling, toothy smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Henderson. So wonderful to have you with us again. May I take your jacket?" she purred. Then Julian stepped forward. The smile did not just fade, it was surgically removed. Her eyes did a swift, contemptuous scan from his sneakers to his cap. The calculation was immediate. The verdict, absolute. Unworthy. Out of place. Problem. "Boarding pass," she said. Her voice was flat, stripped of all warmth. It was not a request. It was a demand for credentials. Julian held out his phone, the QR code for seat 2A glowing on the screen. She didn't take the phone. She leaned in, forcing him to hold it up for her inspection, as if he were a specimen under a microscope. She squinted, her brow furrowed in theatrical disbelief. 2A, she questioned, her voice loud enough for the passengers lining up behind him to hear. "Are you sure you're on the right flight?" "I'm sure," Julian said, his voice even. He could feel the eyes of the other passengers on his back. The man in the banker's suit was staring openly. "This is a full-fare first-class ticket," she announced, as if accusing him of a crime. "We've had issues with fraudulent upgrades and stolen mileage accounts lately. I'll need to verify this with the gate agent." She turned her back on him, leaving him standing in the doorway, blocking the line. She picked up the intercom phone to the cockpit, creating a deliberate bottleneck. Behind him, a man sighed impatiently. "What's the hold-up now?" "Just a routine security verification," Brenda called back, her voice dripping with insinuation. She shot a triumphant look at Julian, a look that said, "I've got you." Julian felt the heat rise in his neck, but it wasn't embarrassment. It was the cold, clarifying fire of purpose. He stood perfectly still, a statue of calm amidst her manufactured chaos. He listened as she spoke into the phone in a loud, urgent whisper. "Yes, Cynthia, it's Brenda. I have a passenger here for 2A. Yes, him. He looks highly suspicious. Can you confirm the payment source? It seems very irregular." There was a pause. Julian could imagine the gate agent typing, the screen flashing. He watched Brenda's posture change. Her back went rigid. "An Amex Centurion?" she whispered into the phone, her voice dropping in shock. "The legendary black card, by invitation only. Registered to A corporation. Vance Industries. She hung up the phone slowly, her face a confused mess of shock and resentment. She had been publicly proven wrong, and she hated him for it. She turned back to Julian. There was no apology. Her eyes burned with a fresh, deeper animosity. She had tried to expose him as a fraud, and in doing so, had only confirmed his legitimacy. It was an unforgivable offense. She gestured curtly with her head. To the right? Thank you, Brenda, Julian said, making a point of using her name. He walked past her into the hushed, cream and taupe world of the first-class cabin. He found his seat, 2A, a spacious pod with its own minibar and a lie-flat bed. He stowed his simple duffel bag in the overhead compartment and settled in. He wanted to close his eyes, to retreat into the anonymity he cherished, but he knew Brenda was just getting started. She began her pre-departure beverage service, a performance of practiced charm for the chosen few. She poured champagne for the banker in 1A. She engaged in a long, fawning conversation with the woman in the Chanel suit. She walked right past Julian's seat, her eyes fixed on the galley as if he were invisible. Julian waited. He waited until she was walking back up the aisle. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quiet but clear. She stopped but didn't turn to face him fully. She simply angled her head, a gesture of profound reluctance. "Yes? I'd like a glass of water, please. Still, no ice." "We are currently in the middle of our pre-flight safety checks," she said, the lie bald and obvious. The bottle of Dom Perignon was still in her hand. "I will attend to you after we are airborne, time permitting." "You just served champagne to the entire cabin," Julian stated, not as a question, but as a fact. His voice carried, cutting through the low hum. The cabin fell silent. The woman in Chanel lowered her magazine, a smirk playing on her lips. Brenda's smile became a thin, sharp line. "Sir, my priority is to serve our established clientele and our Diamond Medallion members first. I'm sure you can understand. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable with the service in the main cabin?" It was a stunningly direct insult, delivered with the plausible deniability of feigned politeness. She was telling him, in front of everyone, that he didn't belong here. Julian looked her directly in the eye. The anger was there, a dragon in his chest, but he held its leash tight. "I am a passenger in this cabin. I paid for this seat. I expect the service that comes with it. I would like a glass of water." Something inside Brenda, some final tether to professionalism, snapped. She leaned down, invading his personal space, her face inches from his. Her voice was a venomous hiss, meant only for him. "Listen to me," she whispered, her breath smelling of coffee and contempt. "I don't know what kind of scam you're running, or who you think you are. But on this airplane, I am God. You will sit there, you will keep your mouth shut, and you will be grateful for whatever I decide to give you. Do not push me. I can have you thrown off this flight for being disruptive before we even leave the gate." Julian didn't flinch. "Is that a threat?" "It's a 30-year track record," she hissed back. She straightened up, smoothed her uniform and walked away, leaving him in a pool of stunned silence. He leaned his head back against the seat. His heart was pounding, not with fear, but with the grim satisfaction of a hunter whose prey had walked directly into the trap. She hadn't just been rude. She had threatened him. She had created a hostile environment. She had, in her arrogance, given him everything he needed. He pulled out his phone, not to complain to customer service, but to open a secure messaging app. He found the contact labeled Anya Sharma. Anya was his CIO, his consigliere, the brilliant, ruthless operator who executed his vision. "Julian, Flight MA212, Senior Purser Brenda Barlow, documenting active hostility and refusal of service. Do not intervene. Just monitor and pull her complete, unredacted personnel file. I want every commendation, every complaint, every union grievance. Now. The 3 dots appeared instantly. Anya. On it, Julian. Is the situation contained? Julian. For now. She's digging her own grave. I'm just letting her choose the shovel. The aircraft doors closed with a final, sealing thud. The safety video began to play. The lights dimmed for takeoff. Julian looked out the window as the plane began its slow taxi toward the runway, the lights of Los Angeles sprawling below. The roar of the engines spooling up usually felt like freedom. Tonight, it sounded like the overture to an execution. The climb out of LA was smooth, a gentle ascent into the dark, star-dusted canvas of the night sky. Below, the city lights dissolved into a glittering web, then vanished beneath a layer of cloud. The seatbelt sign pinged off, signaling the start of the 6-hour journey and the next phase of Brenda's campaign of petty tyranny. Julian hadn't opened his laptop. He didn't want the distraction. Instead, he observed. He watched as Brenda directed the junior flight attendant, a young woman named Chloe, with kind, nervous eyes, with a series of sharp, condescending gestures. He saw Chloe flinch every time Brenda spoke to her. He was witnessing not just a prejudice against passengers, but a culture of bullying within the crew itself. Dinner service began. Brenda took the meal orders with the air of a queen granting audiences. When she arrived at Julian's seat, she didn't make eye contact. "Choice of chicken or fish?" she asked, her tone suggesting he was lucky to be offered either. "I'll have the fish, please," Julian said. "We're out of the fish," she lied, without a flicker of hesitation. "The passenger in 1A just ordered it," Julian noted calmly. "He received the last one. It's the chicken," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Julian simply nodded. Fine, the chicken. He wasn't going to fight over a meal. He was collecting evidence of a pattern. He made another quick note on his phone. Refusal of meal choice. Deliberate. The meal arrived. While others had their trays placed gently before them, his was set down with a sharp clatter. As she poured his wine, a glass he hadn't asked for, she accidentally let a few drops of the deep red liquid splash onto the sleeve of his grey tracksuit. "Oh, my heavens!" she exclaimed, her voice thick with false concern. "How clumsy of me. Here." She dabbed at the stain with a napkin, her touch rough and condescending. "These cheaper fabrics, they just absorb stains so terribly. A shame." Every passenger in the front cabin heard her. It was a perfectly executed microaggression designed to humiliate him while maintaining the thinnest veneer of an apology. Julian looked down at the red stain, then back up at her. He said nothing. His silence seemed to unnerve her more than any outburst would have. He simply picked up his fork and began to eat the dry chicken. Across the aisle from Julian, in seat 2B, sat an elderly black woman. Her name was Dorothy Gable, and she was flying to New York to see her first great-grandchild. She was a picture of quiet grace, dressed in a simple but elegant knit dress. She had been reading a book, but Julian noticed she had put it down and was now pressing a hand to her forehead, her breathing shallow. He recognized the signs immediately, the slight tremor in her hands, the pale, clammy sheen on her skin. His mother, a type 1 diabetic, had looked exactly the same during hypoglycemic episodes. Mrs. Gable saw Brenda passing and raised a trembling hand. "Excuse me, dear?" she called out softly. Brenda stopped, her irritation barely concealed. "Yes? Could I please trouble you for a small glass of orange juice? I'm feeling a bit faint." Brenda glanced at her watch. "Mum, we have just completed the meal service. We will be coming through with coffee and tea in approximately 30 minutes. You can have some juice then." "I'm sorry," Mrs. Gable insisted, her voice growing weaker. "I really need it now. It's for my blood sugar." This was a critical moment. Any trained flight attendant would recognize the potential for a medical emergency. They were taught to prioritize such requests. But Brenda didn't see a passenger in need. She saw an inconvenience, an interruption to her rigid schedule, coming from someone she had already mentally categorized as unimportant. "Everyone needs something," Brenda said, with a dismissive wave of her hand. "You'll have to be patient like everyone else." She turned and walked away. Julian watched, his blood turning to ice. This was no longer about him. This was not about a spilled drink or a rude comment. This was a deliberate refusal of care. This was a woman's health being jeopardized by another's arrogance. His mother's face flashed in his mind. The times she had needed a quick bit of sugar. The panic in her eyes when her levels dropped too low. The dragon in his chest roared. The leash snapped. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. He walked calmly, but with undeniable purpose, to the front galley. The curtain was drawn, but he pushed it aside. Brenda was standing there, complaining to Chloe. "And then he had the audacity to question me about the fish. Can you imagine?" "Excuse me." Julian's voice was low and steady, but it cut through her whining like a surgeon's scalpel. Brenda spun around, her face twisting in fury at the sight of him. "This is a crew-only area. Passengers are forbidden. Get back to your seat immediately." Julian ignored her. He opened the small refrigerator, took out a carton of orange juice, and reached for a glass. "The woman in 2B needs this. She's having a diabetic episode." "I am the purser on this flight," Brenda shrieked, her voice rising in pitch. "I decide what the passengers need. You are interfering with the crew. That is a federal offense." She lunged forward, trying to snatch the carton of juice from his hand. Julian sidestepped her easily, pouring the juice into the glass. "Her health is more important than your schedule, Brenda." The use of her name, the calm defiance, the complete disregard for her authority, it was too much for her to bear. Her carefully constructed world of control was crumbling before her eyes. Challenged by the very man she had deemed worthless, she lost control. "He's attacking me!" she screamed, her voice now a full-blown shriek calculated to cause panic. "Unruly passenger! He's trying to get into the cockpit! Help!" Heads popped up over the seats. The cabin, which had been dark and sleepy, was suddenly awake and alarmed. Julian turned to walk out of the galley, the glass of juice steady in his hand. His only goal was to get it to Mrs. Gable. Brenda blocked his path, planting her feet. Her face was mottled with rage, her eyes wild. "I told you to stop. You are not in charge here." "A woman is sick," Julian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "Get out of my way." He tried to step around her. It was his final, fatal mistake. For Brenda, this was the ultimate challenge, the ultimate humiliation. In her mind, he wasn't just a passenger. He was the embodiment of everyone who had ever questioned her. Everyone she felt was beneath her. Smack. The sound was sharp and ugly, a crack of thunder in the pressurized silence of the cabin. Brenda had slapped him, an open-palmed, full-force blow across his left cheek. Julian's head snapped to the side from the force of it. The glass of orange juice flew from his hand, shattering on the galley floor. A collective gasp rippled through the first-class cabin. Even the hum of the engines seemed to die away. Slowly, deliberately, Julian turned his head back to face her. A livid red mark was already blooming on his skin. He could taste the metallic tang of blood where his teeth had cut the inside of his lip. Brenda stared at her own hand, trembling, as if it had betrayed her. The shock of her own action was written all over her face. But the instinct for self-preservation was stronger. She immediately tried to reframe the narrative. He assaulted me," she stammered, pointing a shaking finger at him. "You all saw it. I was defending myself." Julian didn't raise his voice. He didn't lunge. He didn't make a single threatening move. His rage had cooled, transformed into something far more terrifying. Absolute certainty. He reached into the pocket of his tracksuit pants. A passenger in the front row flinched, thinking he was reaching for a weapon. He pulled out his phone. He looked at Brenda, his eyes as cold and dead as a winter sky. "You have 2 minutes," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it carried with chilling clarity throughout the silent cabin. "What?" Brenda breathed, her bravado evaporating. "You have precisely 2 minutes," Julian repeated, his thumb swiping across the screen, "to comprehend the magnitude of the mistake you just made, because your life as you know it is about to end." He didn't text. He didn't email. He pressed a single icon on his screen, a secure video link. A second later, the face of Anya Sharma appeared, her expression sharp and concerned, sitting in a sleek, modern office half a country away. "Anya," Julian said, his voice steady despite the fire on his cheek. "Execute Protocol Nightingale. Flight MA212, effective immediately." Anya's eyes widened. She knew what Protocol Nightingale was. It was the nuclear option, a contingency plan Julian had created for a catastrophic failure of service or safety. It meant grounding the plane, freezing assets, and launching a full-scale corporate invasion. "Nightingale?" she confirmed, her voice tense. "Julian, are you absolutely certain? That's the point of no return." Julian turned the phone's camera slightly, giving Anya a clear view of his bruised cheek and Brenda's terrified face. "She denied medical assistance to a diabetic passenger," he said, his voice like ice. "And then she assaulted me when I intervened. The entire event is on the forward cabin camera. There is no ambiguity." Anya's expression hardened. All doubt vanished, replaced by cold efficiency. "Executing immediately. The flight deck will receive a priority, one directive from the command center in 60 seconds. The FAA will be notified. A corporate legal team is being dispatched. Stay safe, Julian." The call ended. Brenda stared at him, a dawning horror in her eyes. "Who was that? Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Suddenly, the cabin intercom chimed 3 times in a rapid, urgent sequence, a signal reserved for emergencies. The captain's voice boomed over the PA system. It was not the usual calm, folksy drawl. It was tight, stressed, and laced with panic. "Flight attendants, all stations. Purser Barlow, report to the flight deck. I repeat, Purser Barlow, report to the flight deck immediately. Cease all other activity. That is a direct order from Majestic Air Corporate Command." Brenda froze, the color draining from her face. Corporate Command? That was a term used for national security threats, not unruly passengers. She looked from the intercom speaker back to Julian. He was calmly dabbing the corner of his mouth with a napkin. He hadn't moved from the galley entrance. "What did you do?" she whispered, the question filled with a terror so profound it was almost primal. Julian finally looked at her, and for the first time, he allowed a flicker of his true feelings to show. It wasn't anger. It was a deep, sorrowful pity. "I didn't do anything, Brenda," he said softly. "You did. Mr. Vance is just responding." Who is Mr. Vance?" she stammered, her mind refusing to connect the dots. "Go to the cockpit," Julian said, his voice gentle but final. "The captain has a message for you. It's about your immediate, unscheduled retirement." Brenda stumbled backward, her face a mask of pure, uncomprehending dread. She turned and practically ran toward the cockpit, her 30 years of seniority, her pride, her entire identity, unraveling with every step. Julian looked out the nearest window. The plane was already banking, a slow, heavy turn away from the east. On the flight map on the wall of the cabin, the little white airplane icon was no longer pointing toward New York. It was pointing north toward Chicago. The game wasn't just over. The board had been swept clean. Captain Frank Miller was a pilot of the old school. 35 years in the cockpit, he'd seen it all. Engine fires over the Atlantic, microbursts in Denver, emergency landings in military airfields. He was defined by his unflappable calm. But as he stared at the ACAR's text message glowing on his flight management screen, a cold sweat trickled down his spine. The message wasn't a request. It was a digital commandment that had overridden his authority. The Priority 1 Directive. Menaubehursel. Source: Office of the Chairman, Vance Industries. Execute Protocol Nightingale. Immediate diversion to Ord. Reason: crew assault on corporate principle. Denial of medical aid. Law enforcement and FAA on standby. Confirm receipt. Frank looked at his first officer, a young man named Ben, whose face had gone pale. Vance Industries? Ben whispered. I thought they were in tech. Software. They bought us, son, Frank said, his voice gravelly. The whole damn airline. The deal closed yesterday. The new owner is on our plane. He let that sink in. And according to this, someone in our crew just hit him. The cockpit door buzzed frantically. Frank unlocked it. Brenda Barlow tumbled in, her face streaked with tears, her uniform jacket askew. Captain, you have to do something, she cried, a rehearsed story of victimhood ready on her lips. The passenger in 2A, he's unhinged. He forced his way into the galley. He was acting erratically. I think he's on something. I had to defend myself. He came right at me. We need to have him restrained. Frank turned his chair slowly, his weathered face a grim mask. He didn't look at her with the weary camaraderie of a fellow veteran employee. He looked at her as if she were a ghost. You put your hands on a passenger, Brenda? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. He was a threat to the safety of this flight, she insisted, the lie coming easily. He was aggressive and belligerent. Frank pointed a trembling finger at his screen. Read that, Brenda. She leaned in, squinting at the glowing text. She read the words. Assault on corporate principle. Principle? She frowned, the word not computing. What does that mean? Is he some kind of executive? It means, Frank said, his voice cracking with the sheer weight of the catastrophe, that the man in the grey tracksuit is Julian Vance. It means he owns this plane. He owns the wings. He owns the seat you're sitting in, and he owns your pension. Or at least, he did. The comprehension hit Brenda, not like a wave, but like a physical blow. Her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the jump seat, her breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. The tracksuit, she whispered. The sneakers. I slapped him. Oh God, I slapped him. The silence in the cockpit was absolute, broken only by the hum of the avionics and Brenda's choked gasps. You didn't just slap a passenger, Brenda, Frank said, turning back to his controls. You slapped the man who signs 50,000 paychecks. He took a deep breath. Get out of my cockpit. Go to the rear galley. Strap yourself into a jump seat. Do not speak to a single soul. Your career ended 10 minutes ago. Now you need to focus on staying out of prison. Frank, please, she begged. Out! He roared, a lifetime of suppressed frustration in his voice. Brenda scrambled out of the cockpit. Frank engaged the autopilot and turned to his first officer. Ben, get on the horn to Chicago approach. Declare a pan-pan. Tell them we have a security incident involving a crew member and a medical situation. Tell them we require priority handling and law enforcement to meet the aircraft." Back in the cabin, the passengers knew something was deeply wrong. The steep, unannounced turn had sent drinks sliding and woken the few who were sleeping. The PA system crackled to life. It was Captain Miller. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing an in-flight crew issue that requires our immediate attention on the ground. We are diverting to Chicago O'Hare International Airport. We expect to be landing in approximately 50 minutes. Cabin crew, prepare the cabin for arrival. And please, for your safety, remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened." The cabin erupted in confused murmurs. The woman in the Chanel suit stood up. "This is outrageous. I have a connection to catch. What is going on?" She glared at Julian, who was now sitting calmly in his seat, a fresh glass of water placed on his console by the terrified but grateful junior flight attendant, Chloe. "This is all your fault, isn't it? Your little drama in the galley?" Julian didn't look at her. He was typing on his phone, composing an email to Anya. Subject: Nightingale, Phase 2. The woman took a step towards him. "I'm talking to you." Chloe, the young flight attendant, intercepted her. "Ma'am, please, the captain has instructed everyone to remain seated," she said, her voice shaking but firm. It was a small act of courage, but in that moment it was monumental. She was choosing a side. Julian looked up at Chloe and gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval. A new note went to Anya. Identify Junior FA Chloe, mark for promotion and leadership training. She has integrity. In the rear galley, Brenda Barlow sat strapped into a jump seat, staring at the floor, her world imploding in slow motion. She replayed every moment. The sneer in the lounge, the condescension at the door, the lie about the fish, the refusal of the juice, and the slap. The slap. An act of supreme, career-ending arrogance. "He owns the airline." The phrase echoed in her mind, a death knell for her life, her identity, her future. She wasn't just going to be fired, she was going to be an example. A cautionary tale whispered in crew lounges for decades to come. O'Hare was a sea of flashing lights. Flight MA-2212 didn't taxi to a gate at the terminal. It was directed to a remote hard stand, a desolate patch of concrete far from the public eye. As the engine spooled down into an eerie silence, the passengers looked out the windows to see a scene straight out of a movie. Half a dozen police cars and 3 black Suburbans were parked in a tight perimeter around the aircraft, their blue and red lights painting the cabin in strobing, anxious colors. The main cabin door opened. The cold, damp air of a Chicago night rushed in. The first people to board were not airport ground staff. They were 2 uniformed Chicago police officers and 2 grim-faced men in dark suits who carried the unmistakable aura of federal agents. Behind them walked a woman with a sharp, intelligent face and a presence that commanded instant respect. It was Anya Sharma, Julian's COO. She had taken a private jet from New York the moment she got his call. Anya walked directly to seat 2A. The other passengers watched in stunned silence. "Julian," she said, her voice a mixture of concern and efficiency. "Are you all right? There's a paramedic team on standby." Julian stood up. The red mark on his cheek was now a deep, angry purple. "I'm fine, Anya. A little bruised, but fine. How is Mrs. Gable?" "She's stable. The paramedics are waiting to check her out as soon as she deplanes. She's already agreed to give a full statement." Anya handed him a tablet. "The FAA has opened a formal investigation. The legal team is filing a civil suit against Ms. Barlow for assault and for the full cost of the diversion, which we're estimating at over $200,000. Julian nodded. He stepped out into the aisle. The woman in the Chanel suit stared at him, her mouth agape. She saw Anya Sharma's face, a face she vaguely recognized from the glossy cover of a business magazine in the seat-back pocket in front of her. Fortune. Or was it Forbes? The nameplate on the screen of reality suddenly clicked into place, aligning with the scattered, terrifying facts of the last hour. The Amex Centurion card. Vance Industries. The immediate, terrifying authority that had reached across the country to wrench their plane from the sky. The man in the grey tracksuit. The man whose face she had struck. The quiet, unassuming man was Julian Vance. You're... The woman in the Chanel suit stammered, her voice a reedy whisper. The blood had drained from her face, leaving behind a mask of chalky terror. She understood now that she had not been a spectator to a drama. She had been a co-conspirator, and the judge had just walked into the room. Julian turned his gaze upon her, and there was no triumph in it. Only a profound weariness. His expression was as flat and unreadable as a slate of grey stone. "I'm the man who is refunding your ticket in full," he said, his voice level and devoid of emotion. "And I am also the man who is banning you from this airline, and any of its partners, for life. Your vocal support contributed to a hostile and dangerous environment for another passenger. You will be escorted to a private lounge where a car will be arranged to take you to the nearest bus station. Enjoy your journey to New York." He did not wait for a response. He turned and began to walk toward the back of the plane, Anya falling into step beside him. The woman in Chanel simply stood there, swaying slightly, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. The architecture of her world, built on the solid bedrock of wealth and privilege, had just been condemned. Julian's walk down the aisle was a gauntlet of stunned, silent faces. He felt their eyes on him, on the livid bruise blooming across his cheek. He was no longer an anonymous man in a cheap tracksuit. He was a walking headline, a creature of myth. He hated it. He hated the whispers, the awe, the fear. It was the very thing he had spent his life avoiding. He stopped at the rear galley. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and dread. Brenda Barlow was unbuckling herself from the jump seat, her movements slow and clumsy, as if her limbs belonged to someone else. Her face was a ruin of smeared mascara and blotchy skin. The two Chicago police officers stood a respectful distance away, their presence a silent, final verdict. "Brenda," Julian said. The name was not an accusation. It was a simple statement of fact. She flinched as if he had struck her again. She looked up, and in her eyes he saw the last, desperate scramble of a cornered animal. It was a raw, pleading terror that sought not mercy, but an escape hatch, a rewind button. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice a hoarse croak. "Mr. Vance, I am so sorry. I swear to God, I didn't know. If I had just known who you were, I would have treated you like a king." The words hung in the air, a confession more damning than any video evidence. Julian's expression hardened, the weariness replaced by a focused, diamond-hard clarity. "That," he said, his voice dropping so low it was almost a whisper, yet it sliced through the galley's silence, "is the entire problem. It shouldn't matter who I am. It shouldn't matter that the ticket was purchased with a corporate black card. It shouldn't matter if I'm wearing a tracksuit bought at a discount store or a tuxedo tailored on Savile Row. Human decency is not a commodity to be dispensed based on a customer's perceived net worth." He took a step closer, not to intimidate, but to ensure she understood the fundamental nature of her failure. "You didn't see a passenger in 2B who was frightened and in medical distress. You saw an inconvenience who was interrupting your schedule. You didn't see a man in 2A. You saw a stereotype that offended your sense of order. You looked, Brenda, but you didn't see. Your prejudice, your petty, pathetic snobbery could have cost that woman her life tonight. And for that, there is no apology that can suffice. He held her gaze for a long moment, letting the weight of his words settle into the wreckage of her career. Then he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the police officers. She's all yours. The reality of the moment finally broke through her denial. No, she shrieked, as one of the officers gently but firmly took her arm. The sound was sharp and ragged, the cry of a soul being stripped bare. Please, I have 30 years with this company. 30 years. I have a mortgage, my daughter's college tuition, my pension. You had a pension, Julian corrected her, his voice devoid of malice, but filled with an irrevocable finality. He turned his back on her then, a deliberate act of dismissal. He walked away without a backward glance, leaving the sound of her frantic, sobbing pleas to be swallowed by the vast, indifferent silence of the airplane. As the police led a weeping Brenda Barlow down the mobile stairs, her starched uniform now a prisoner's garb under the strobing police lights, Julian paused. He saw Dorothy Gable, who was being attended to by a calm, reassuring paramedic. He walked over and knelt by her seat, a gesture of deference that silenced the remaining whispers in the cabin. He gently took her hand, his own large and warm, over her cool, trembling one. "Ma'am," he said, his voice soft with a sincerity that was utterly genuine, "on behalf of every single person who will work for this airline from tomorrow morning forward, I am profoundly and deeply sorry for what you were forced to endure tonight. It was an inexcusable failure, and I promise you, it will never happen again." Dorothy looked at him, her eyes clear and perceptive despite her ordeal. A faint smile touched her lips. "It wasn't your fault, young man," she said, her voice still weak but steady. "You were a gentleman. You reminded me of my late husband. He always believed in doing the right thing, even when it was the hard thing. Majestic Air will, of course, be covering all your medical expenses and any follow-up care you may require," Julian told her. "We are also providing you and your entire family with complimentary first-class travel, anywhere we fly, for life. But more than that, I have a request. We are building a new passenger accessibility and sensitivity training program from the ground up. It needs a soul. It needs your wisdom. We would be honored if you would agree to work with us as a paid senior consultant." Tears, this time of gratitude and astonishment, welled in the old woman's eyes and traced paths down her wrinkled cheeks. I've never been a consultant for anything in my life," she whispered. "But for this? For you? I would be honored." Later, as the other passengers were being discreetly escorted to a private lounge to be rebooked, Julian stood on the cold, wind-swept tarmac with Anya. The air smelled of jet fuel and damp asphalt. The flashing lights cast long, dancing shadows, making the hulking form of the Boeing 737 look like a beached whale. "Phase 2 is in motion," Anya reported, her tone crisp and efficient, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos of the past hour. She held a tablet, its screen glowing in the darkness. "The memo announcing the acquisition has been disseminated to all 50,000 employees. It also details the immediate, for-cause termination of Brenda Barlow and the implementation of a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind, effective immediately. The video from the passenger in 3A is now in the possession of our legal and PR teams. We control the narrative." "Good," Julian said, pulling the collar of his tracksuit up against the biting Chicago wind. He felt a deep, bone-aching exhaustion settle over him. "And the new training initiative?" Anya allowed a small, rare smile. "We're calling it the Florence Program," she said softly. "Named after your mother. I thought it was appropriate." Julian looked up at the vast, dark belly of the aircraft, a monument to the drama that had unfolded within it. The slap still stung his cheek, a dull, throbbing ache that was more than just physical. It was a psychic wound, a reminder of the casual cruelty his mother had so often described. But for the first time, the pain was overshadowed by a different feeling. It wasn't the sweet, fleeting taste of revenge. It was the grim, profound satisfaction of a surgeon who has just excised a malignant tumor. The procedure had been violent and bloody, but it was necessary. The healing could now begin. The news of the slap at 30,000 feet became a global phenomenon before the sun rose over the East Coast. The viral video, combined with the bombshell press release from Vance Industries at 6 a.m., created a perfect storm of corporate drama and human interest. The stock market, predictably irrational, went wild. Majestic Air's stock, which had been languishing for years, didn't just climb, it launched. Wall Street wasn't just buying shares, they were buying a story, a decisive, modern owner, unafraid to get his hands dirty, cleaning house from the inside out. Analysts coined a new term, the Nightingale effect, a testament to the protocol that had brought a titan to its knees and promised its rebirth. Inside Majestic Air's sprawling, soulless corporate headquarters in Dallas, the atmosphere was one of pure, undiluted panic. The old guard of executives, men who had risen through the ranks on golf course handshakes and a shared philosophy of sweeping unpleasantness under the rug, were watching their world burn on live television. By 9 a.m., Julian, having flown from Chicago on his private Gulfstream, walked into the main boardroom. He was wearing a perfectly tailored dark grey suit that seemed to absorb the light in the room. The faint purple shadow of the bruise on his cheek was still visible, a stark, visceral reminder of the previous night's events. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His very presence was a judgment. He looked at the 20 vice presidents seated around the polished mahogany table, their faces a mixture of fear, bluster, and disbelief. "Good morning," he said, his voice a quiet force that commanded absolute attention. "Thank you for coming in. Most of you are fired." A collective intake of breath. He laid out his vision with the cold, irrefutable logic of a programmer debugging corrupted code. The entire senior leadership of human resources was gone, their complicity in fostering a toxic culture laid bare by a mountain of ignored complaints. The head of in-flight services was gone. The VP of customer relations was gone. Anyone whose name was attached to the dismissal of more than 2 credible discrimination or harassment complaints in the past 5 years was gone. He had the data on the screen behind him, a web of interconnected failures and willful blindness. Security guards, impassive and professional, stood by the door, holding empty cardboard boxes. In their place, he announced a new team, promoting talented, diverse leaders from within the company, people whose innovative, empathetic proposals had been repeatedly shot down by the very men now packing their desks. He announced Chloe, the junior flight attendant from Flight 212, was being fast-tracked into a management training program, her courage to be rewarded and amplified. The aftermath for Brenda Barlow was a slow, agonizing slide into a hell of her own making. Released on bail, she became a pariah. Her face, contorted in a snarl on the viral video, was a meme, a symbol of entitled rage. The powerful flight attendants' union, after a brief, obligatory statement of support, saw the overwhelming evidence. The video, the testimony of Dorothy Gable, and the thick dossier of past complaints Julian's team had strategically leaked. They dropped her case, issuing a public statement condemning her actions as an aberration that did not represent their members. Without the union's legal shield, she was annihilated. The civil suit from Majestic Air was a masterpiece of legal devastation. She was found liable for the full, itemized cost of the diversion. Her house, her car, her savings, her 401k, all were liquidated to satisfy the judgment. Her 30-year pension was declared forfeit under the gross misconduct clause of her contract, a clause that had not been successfully invoked in over 2 decades. Stripped of her career, her wealth, and her reputation, she moved into the damp, wood-paneled basement of her sister's house in a forgotten suburb of Phoenix. She tried to find work, but her infamy was a digital ghost that haunted her every move. A Google search of her name was a roadmap of her ruin. No one would hire the slap attendant. She was recognized in the grocery store, whispered about at the pharmacy. The absolute power she had wielded in the pressurized tube of an airplane was gone, and in the real world she discovered a new, more terrifying kind of invisibility. The world she had spent her life looking down upon now refused to even look at her. Her prison was not the basement. It was the chilling realization that without her uniform, she was nothing. 6 months later, the Florence program, designed with the passionate input of Dorothy Gable, was being adopted as the new gold standard for the entire aviation industry. Majestic Air, once a symbol of tired legacy snobbery, was now the most talked-about airline in America. Its new ad campaign, featuring real employees and passengers sharing stories of kindness, was a viral sensation. The tagline was simple, powerful, and a direct rebuke of its past: humanity in the air. Julian Vance stood in his New York office, a minimalist space of glass and steel overlooking Central Park. He was looking at the quarterly report Anya had placed on his desk. Customer satisfaction metrics had climbed 400%. Employee turnover was the lowest in the industry. Profits had shattered every projection. "The junior flight attendant from that flight, Chloe?" Julian asked, his gaze fixed on the sprawling city below. "How is she doing?" "She just accepted the position of head of in-flight training for the entire West Coast hub," Anya replied, a proud smile on her face. "She's a natural, a true leader, and Mrs. Gable sends her best. She says her great-grandson sleeps with the Model 757 you sent him." Julian nodded, a rare, small smile touching his lips. He unconsciously touched his cheek, where the phantom sting of the slap sometimes returned, not as a memory of pain, but as a touchstone, a reminder of the purpose behind the storm he had unleashed. That evening, he was scheduled to fly to London for a technology summit. His private jet was fueled and waiting at Titterborough. "Cancel it," he told his executive assistant. "Book me a seat on Majestic Air. Flight 100 to Heathrow tonight." "First class, Mr. Vance?" Julian considered it for a moment, the image of the cream and taupe cabin flashing in his mind. "No," he said. "Put me in coach, 42B, middle seat." Anya, who was still in his office, raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? You've earned the legroom." "I need to see if the change is real," he said, turning from the window to face her. "The real work isn't done in the front of the plane. The soul of an airline lives in the back. That's the only way I'll know if we've truly won." 2 hours later, a man in a simple grey tracksuit and a black baseball cap pulled low over his eyes-boarded MA100 to London. He shuffled down the narrow aisle, found his middle seat between a college student frantically typing on a laptop and a businessman already snoring softly, and settled in for the long, transatlantic flight. He was just another face in the crowd, anonymous, unremarkable, and perfectly content. The flight attendant working his section, a young man with a warm, unforced smile, came by with the drink cart. He didn't just look at the passengers, he saw them. "Good evening, folks," he said, his tone genuinely friendly. "Long flight ahead. What can I get for you to start? First one's on me. We're all in this together for the next 7 hours." Julian asked for a glass of water. The flight attendant handed it to him with a smile that reached his eyes. There was no calculation, no judgment, no condescension. There was only the simple, profound act of service. As the plane soared over the dark Atlantic, a silver needle stitching the fabric of the night, Julian leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes. The steady roar of the engines was a lullaby. The bruise on his cheek had long since faded, but the lesson it taught was now etched into the DNA of the company he had remade. Revenge was not about the satisfaction of destroying one person. It was about the quiet, enduring work of building something better in the space where they had cast their shadow. And for the first time since his mother had passed away, Julian Vance, surrounded by strangers in the cramped confines of seat 42B, felt a deep and abiding sense of peace. The sky, at last, truly belonged to everyone,